Welcome back to Climb Higher with Her. Today, we're doing something a little different. Back in March, in honor of Women's History Month, I had the privilege of moderating the third annual Women in Leadership panel right here at Kean University. The room was filled with students, alumni, and seasoned professionals, all gathered for one reason: to hear the raw, unfiltered truth about the climb to the top. In this first part of our special series, you'll hear our panelists pull back the curtain on how they got started, sharing the moments of doubt and triumph, as well as the early lessons that defined their careers. I'm excited to be able to bring that discussion to you via our podcast. The audio you are about to hear is live from that room, so let's head to the stage for part one of the Women in Leadership panel. Dr. Karma Brown Warren brings a legacy of service that is shaped by intellect and compassion. Her journey has crossed multiple fields, from engineering to medicine and education. Throughout it, she has remained grounded in humanity and a profound commitment to community. And we have Kean alumna Alexa Canas, brings a perspective shaped by vision and intention. Through her work with the New York Jets, she shows how strategic partnerships can advance an organization's impact and sustain excellence at the highest level. And finally, Dr. Tiffany Perkins-Munn reflects the kind of leadership our current times demand. At J.P. Morgan Chase, her work at the intersection of data, business, and innovation shows how clarity and adaptability can steady decision-making in a complex world. So, you may know this. The 2026 Women's History Month theme is Leading the Change, Women Shaping a Sustainable Future. And while our panelists arrived at this moment on different paths, what they share is profound: the courage to challenge expectations and the vision to keep breaking new ground. This kind of leadership by our panel of trailblazers ties perfectly with the 2026 Women's History Month theme. And that spirit also carries into my Climb Higher with Her podcast. Our goal is to elevate women's voices about leadership, career growth, and professional development through authentic conversations. The podcast features leaders across different sectors, each offering practical insights for listeners at every stage of leadership. So tonight's conversation, as you heard, is being recorded for a future podcast episode or two, depending on how long we conversate tonight. And its insight and inspiration, I am so proud to say, will reach beyond just this room. Success is rarely a straight line. Leadership is about showing up intentionally with your gifts and your grit and standing firm in your purpose. So now, let's turn to three remarkable women who are advancing their fields and helping define what bold leadership can make possible. Thank you again for being here. We are beyond excited to have the three of you, and we are going to get started with the following question that I'm going to ask each of you to answer and address. And Alexa, we'll start with you, if you don't mind. So the question is, can you briefly walk us through your career journey and share a key moment that helped define the direction you took?
Sure. So I think what's interesting about my story is I'm a Kean alum. Um, so ironically, I actually remember vividly what kind of put me on the path. I was actually in an events class here at Kean. We came to Liberty Hall at the time. This beautiful building wasn't here. We talked about events. At that point in time, we were talking about events like wedding planning. So I thought that that was kind of the path that I wanted to go on. Um, and then my friend worked for the Jets and events. And at that point in time, I didn't have the knowledge to understand at all what went into football or sports other than coaches, players, and like medical staff. So I really think being at Kane and taking that event class was really what opened my mind to my field now. I now work in the sponsorship department. So how it's all connected is when I started at the Jets in 2013 after I graduated, I was in the events department and I helped out and worked a lot with the sponsorship department. And by taking the initiative and really trying to make my name known, they had me on as a seasonal intern. And essentially, because of my hard work and really pushing to try to get a full time spot, they created a role for me full time. And I've been there ever since.
What you're hearing from Alexa, right, is she started as an intern, a seasonal intern, and for how long did you stay in that position before they created that job for you?
So I was an events intern for a year and then seasonal for 2. There's logistics when you're trying to create a new role. So I basically took the chance and hoped that after my second year of my seasonal internship, I would take the risk instead of getting a full-time job and maybe do something that I wasn't as passionate about. I took the risk and took another year as a seasonal. And then so in 2016 is when I was full-time, and I've been there ever since.
Yeah, thank you for that because that shows too, right? It doesn't have to be the traditional path. She was a seasonal intern and was okay with that because she knew ultimately what she wanted. Tiffany, same question for you.
Yeah, sure. So, up until about a month ago, I was the head of data and analytics for our connected commerce business at JP Morgan Chase. That's a business that has, travel, offers, all of the payments, like you might have Zelle, et cetera. And so, if you had asked me, like when I was in college, or I never would have imagined, I should say, that I would be running a 300-person team in on the senior leadership team of an investment banking firm. And at this particular investment banking firm, I've been in all three of our businesses. I started out in the institutional business, where the clients are institutions like Walmart, State Street, et cetera. I moved to the asset and wealth management business, which is really the high and ultra high net worth clients. And now I'm at Chase. I never would have imagined, and it's been very much like Alexa's, it's been a very nonlinear path. I started off, I came out of college, I started college as pre med. I ended college and decided, well, I don't want to be a doctor, like a medical doctor, and I wanted to do research. So I thought, oh, I'll go get my PhD and maybe I'll do work at the NSF or the CDC. And by the time I had finished my graduate degree, I had taken so many statistics courses that I actually ended up graduating with a dual degree in social personality psychology and advanced quantitative methods, which really translates into like applied statistics. Because what I really care about is how do you measure behaviors? How do they change over time? What's meaningful and not as people are making decisions? And so that's the path that I chose. And I started out, as I mentioned, as a psychologist who was interested in statistics. I moved into market research. Then in my market research firm, they asked me if I wanted to come work at Morgan Stanley, which was how I ended up in financial services. And so I've moved around to a lot of financial services firms since that juncture. Retail banking, hedge funds, asset management firms. So I have a really good feel of data analytics. You know, I was doing data science before it was a thing. It was like 2012, and Thomas Davenport came out with this cool new field called data science, which, by the way, not to age myself, but I had been doing for like 10 years. But I thought, oh, good, now we get to make money in this field because he's made it into this big fancy thing. And so I've been in the data and analytics field, and it is a field that is growing. It is a field that used to be a vertical that is now a horizontal. And by that, I mean that data analytics and AI is going to infuse every single industry, every single job, every single role. So don't think about it as, do you want to go into data and AI? Think about it as, how do you get in front of data and AI in your particular industry or field? Because it will matter everywhere. And that's my sort of, I think that's the key takeaway here, is really that it is learn it, figure out what you need to know about how it, plays in your particular space, and become comfortable with it.
Thank you for that. Dr. Warren?
All right, so my story is obviously not linear as well. I have to give a shout out that I love math and science since I was young, and it was kind of sealed the deal when I went to a high school called Science High School in Newark. Give a shout out to Science High School, and when I went there, I said, "Oh, I love the analytical part of learning and applying math and science." So I said, I want to be an electrical engineer. That was it. That's what I wanted to do. So I decided I wanted to go to an HBCU that had the top engineering program, and that was Tuskegee University in Alabama. So I went down to Tuskegee, did my electrical engineering, but I had to intern. So I interned every summer as an electrical engineering intern. And the first summer was at PSCNG. I was in a program called Inroads, and that's a program that used to place inner city youth in corporate America, and I was in their high voltage department. The next 2 summers, I interned with General Motors in Michigan, and it sealed the deal that I really loved math and science and engineering. But then when I went back to school, I started volunteering at the hospital as part of an organization, and I loved it. I loved that part that started to dwell that little space inside my heart that said, you know what, I enjoy helping people, learning about what's happening with them, talking with them. And so I thought, maybe I like this a little better, but no, I'm going to graduate in engineering because I've been doing this all this time, and that was the goal, and that's what we're going to do. So I graduated in engineering. I started working for Xerox Corporation in Rochester, New York. I was in their management training program. And then the next year, I moved back to Michigan and worked for General Motors in their V8 engine plant, where I was not only their first Black engineer, but I was their first female engineer. So you can imagine that was a challenge. But what I did was, even during the summer times, I had a great relationship with my boss, whose wife was an OBGYN. And she said to me, and I'm going to tell you because many of you may not know this, you can go to medical school without having to major in those sciences like biology, chemistry. And I said, what? I can do that? Absolutely, you can. All you need to do is make sure that you take the required courses to get into medical school and do well on the MCATs. So what did I do? Sneak out of work at 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, and go to classes at University of Michigan and make sure that I was taking the correct courses to get into medical school. And then 3.5 years later, I applied to medical school and I was accepted. Now, here's the pivotal moment. Do I stay in a job that I know is secure? I'm in a management program. I'm getting ready to go to upper management. Or do I take a chance upon a career that I don't even know much about? I'm getting ready to start from the bottom, right? I did. I chose to go to medical school. So I came back to New Jersey and I went to Rutgers. Now, the first year in medical school was the worst year of my life. I must have cried every day. what in the world had you done, Karma? And what I realized is it was hard for me because I still had an engineering mind. See, as an engineer, we think about analyze, we come up with derivations, we have a thought process. Medical school is nothing like that. Medical school is repetition and memorization. And so I had to learn how to train my mind to be a different type of studier. And eventually I went to my clinical years and I said, this is what I came here for. I came here to enjoy and learning about the processes and connecting with people. And I loved it. By the end of medical school, I learned a career that allowed me to gel not only the fast pace of learning and analytical and coming up with diagnosis, but also to connect with my patients, and that was emergency medicine. And I chose emergency medicine as my career, and I did that for 20 years. Today, I now work on venous disease and vascular disease of the legs so people can have more comfort and mobility. But it still allows me to connect with patients and allows me to do what my purpose was, which is to give back and to help others.
Now that we have the background, right, of where, how, and where they are and how they got there, I want to talk about specifically pivot times, change. And so, Dr. Warren, we are going to stick with you because I want to know, you talked about two distinct pivots, obviously. The one is going from engineering to medical school, but then also leaving 20 years of trauma medicine in the ER to start a business with your new field of study. So my question for you is, regardless of which pivot you take, or maybe you answer for both of them, I don't know, but what was the most challenging part of the pivot and how did you push through that?
I probably have to give you like two pivots, right? The first pivot for me that was really challenging was after I finished residency. And I'm an emergency medicine attending. And when you come out, you have to decide whether you're going to work along your peers who do rotating shifts, or are you going to be a night doctor? I chose to be a night doc. As a night doc, I work 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I had a limited number of shifts per week, which sounds great, right? I only worked but so many shifts. I had a set schedule. I was home with my children. I was able to see them when they woke up in the morning, when they came home from school. I was able to be present and go to activities. So that sounds great. But the flip side of that is because I was working night shift, I didn't have a lot of visibility with leadership. Nobody with the suits is walking around the ER at 1 o'clock in the morning and seeing your hard, great work, right? So for me to go from a clinical clinician to assistant professor to associate professor took almost 20 years, whereas my comrades probably got that kind of promotion in 8 years. So that was a challenge for me. The thing about that is that night shift was hard. Even though I was present with my kids, I wasn't always nice. I was tired. I worked 11 to 7, so some days it was like, oh God, what I got to do today? Leave me alone. I just want to sleep in the bed. So, there's some challenges with that. And then at some point after 20 years of doing that, I said, you know what, maybe there's something different out there. How many of you have watched the show The Pit? Yeah. So if you have not, that is pretty much reality of what happens in the emergency department. And so after 20 years, I had to sit down, pray, and say, God, is there something else for me? What else can I do? Knowing that what drives me is connecting with people and making sure that I'm changing lives. And so by doing this new career that was brought to me that allowed me to change from working night shift to day shift, I pivoted but still kept the same focus with what I'm doing, which is being able to change lives.
So, Alexa, can you share a moment when you had to pivot, whether it was professionally or personally, and what really helped you navigate that transition with confidence?
So I really thought deeply about this question because professionally, when I think of pivot, it's changing roles, right? Going to a different company. I've worked with the same company my entire career. Um, so I think something that I had to do and pivot with. So when I went on a maternity back in February of 25, around this time, our organization went through a reorg. So with that reorg, three of the people that I worked very close with, that I confided in, that I looked to as leaders, decided to leave the organization. And with that, when I came back from maternity, I essentially had to come into this new role. Ended up being like a manager and kind of mid level within the organization to the one with the most expertise. So coming back from maternity with two kids at home, not even a 2-year old and now a baby, I really had to figure out how to be a leader to these young group of people that are now working under me. And I've managed people before, but I think that was like a very pivotal moment where I actually was able to come into my own and figure out how I wanted to be a leader of my own. So while I haven't really left the organization, there was this pivot within the organization that really helped me become who I am as a leader and how I wanted to be as a leader.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's the growth that we go through along the way, right? So you're moving you said you had managed individuals before, but this was a bigger change, and adjusting to that and learning how to really lead yet another group of people. All the while you had all this personal stuff going on with a new baby and a young son as well. That's not easy.
No, it was definitely a experience to manage your time. So pivoting, like personally, I'm very fortunate where my husband understands the work that I do. Like in sports, you're working a lot of hours, you're working games, you're traveling to London, you're traveling to all these different places. So I'm fortunate to have a great husband that understands my career and takes the time to be with the kids a little bit more when he knows that I have to be at work. So personally, it's just trying to navigate being a mom in the sports world, which can be a little bit challenging. There's definitely more women in sports now, but it's still, needs a little bit evolving, I guess.
Well, we do have a question coming up about that, so hold on. Uh, Tiffany, same question for you regarding pivoting and managing that transition.
Yeah, so in 2010, I was married. I had been married for 13 or 14 years. I had a 5-year-old daughter. I was working at Citadel, the hedge fund. I lived in New Jersey. I was going back and forth to work. My daughter was 5. My husband, Vincent, was working at Bear Stearns, and he had left Bear Stearns. Remember when it imploded, and he was in the community, like working in, if you guys know, like a funplex, or it was called Grand Slam, but they have batting cages and jungle gyms for the kids and things like that. And in April of 2010, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And at the time, like I said, my daughter was 5. I was working in the city. And, we went through he had a mass on the tail of his uh, the organ, the pancreas, and he had to have a surgery. He had a surgery on his birthday in April of 2010 and subsequently started getting a little bit better. But unfortunately, he passed away in September of 2010. And I was working on the street. My daughter was 5. And I was like, what do I do now? Like, I'm leaving home at 5:30 in the morning. I'm coming home at 8 p.m. I needed to pivot. like in a serious way. And I needed to be present for her because I felt like it's very important. You know, kids take responsibility for things they have no control over. So it was really important to me in that moment that she understands she has nothing to do with this. It's not her fault. I wanted her to bear no guilt. You know, we started doing a lot of, the Cancer Society actually has a lot of activities to help kids work through tragedies like that. So when the parent dies, um, you know, exercises, drawing and talking and things like that. So and I left the street. I actually was no longer on the street. I was trying to figure out, Wall Street, I mean. Let's get that straight. In my head, I realized how that sounded. Um, but I needed to, you know, like figure out what to do. So this could be helpful because I decided that someone mentioned to me working with a franchise consultant. Are any of you franchisees or familiar? So how that works is you work with a franchise consultant who has a lot of inventory. You want someone who has a lot of inventory because you don't pay them, you pay the actual company that you buy into, right? So you want someone who gives you a lot of exposure. So I'm home, my daughter's home, I'm sort of managing her life, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. I start talking to a franchise consultant. The consultant says, "Oh, they do a really cool exercise with you. They do an exercise that's like, what do you think you're good at, but you're not great at? And what are you probably better at than you think you are?" And so they go through this exercise, and out of that exercise, they make recommendations for you on the type of businesses that you want to be in. And they recommended to me, they came back to me after this exercise and they said, "Oh, you know, what about a Dunkin' Donuts?" And I said, "Well, what do you do after you open a Dunkin' Donuts? You sit around and eat donuts all day?" Like that feels like Dr. Karma might not like that, because that feels like I might be, you know, eating a lot of sugar and not taking care of my health. So I said, that's not good. Then they said they offered me Ducks and Hoods. Ducks and Hoods is a like a commercial kitchen cleaning business that is required in New Jersey. So it has to be done in this regulated way. And I thought, well, that's kind of grimy and that doesn't fit my persona. So I don't think we can do Ducks and Hoods. And then they introduced me to Title Boxing Club. Title Boxing Club was a fitness concept. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's like CKO boxing, if you haven't heard of Title. But you wrap your hands, you put on a boxing gloves, you work out in the class on a heavy bag to a trainer. And so that's the one I decided to go with. So I opened a Title Boxing Club, staying at home. I did everything, right? I did point of sale. I had to go speak to a seismologist to make sure the heavy bags could withstand an earthquake. I had to go deal with the municipality of Princeton because it was in Princeton. You know, just everything you could think of. I hired trainers. So I'm in a completely different business now. I completely pivoted into a different business. And I was loving it. I was in the community. I was with my daughter. She was growing. I did that for about 5 years. And then I came to a crossroads because someone that I was working with in finance said, "Oh, I'm building out a team. Do you want to come build out this team?" I said, "No, what are you talking about? I have trainers. I have trainers now, and I have a gym. And yeah, I don't do that anymore." And she was like, "Well, maybe you could just come help me hire the team." And I said, "Well, I could help you hire the team, you know, but I'm in the gym now. This is what I'm doing." And I helped her hire the team, and then I started working more. But keep in mind, this is what I was trained to do. This is what I did my entire life. So I just fell right back into it. And then at the end, she was like, "Well, I think you should probably just come back to work." And I thought, you know what? I could go back to work. I'll just put a general manager in my place in the gym, and I'll go back to work. And I put the general manager in the place in my gym, and the gym started to decline, mainly because I wasn't there anymore. You know, I was the face of the gym. People were calling me like, "Oh, can you come to my daughter's play?" Or, "Oh, let's work out. Are you going to be there at 12? I'm going to do the 12 o'clock class with you," and things like that. So I had created a culture in the community. And so I couldn't replicate that with the man. And plus, no one is ever going to care as much about your business as you do. And so I decided, and I was coming up on my lease. It was about to end. So I just made a decision to go back into financial services, close the business, and go back into the business that I knew. And oh my God, when I got back into financial services, it was as if the shades had been lifted on my over my eyes. Like, talk about smoke and mirrors. Like, I just saw I had done so much myself, like building something from scratch and really leaning in, that I realized that I didn't have the faith in myself when I was in the job the first time. And the first time I thought, I'm doing this job. I know what I'm doing. I have the Ph.D., but I didn't grow up in financial services, and they have a way of making you feel like you don't belong. Like, you don't, what are you going to tell me about my clients? I know these clients well. I've had them forever. How are you going to use data? And keep in mind, this is before data was a hot thing, right? And so they were like, what are you going to tell us? And I always felt like a little bit like, trying to find my way. And when I came back, I saw everyone for who they were, and I understood things that I did not understand before. And I knew when people opened their mouths whether or not they were saying things that made sense or did not. And it was a tragedy that led to so much clarity and insight that it was unbelievable that I hadn't done this before, which was start my own business. So I left, I pivoted, I went out, I did my own business. I pivoted back into financial services, and the learning that came along with that was monumental. And now my daughter is 21 and about to graduate from NYU in game design. So if any of you have jobs for her, she's looking for a job. Um, so I think pivots are part of life, and that just was a really heavy life pivot that was, that led me, I guess, to the place I was supposed to be. By the way, I'm remarried. My husband is here. I have a new family. My daughter is here. And yeah, we're doing well. Thank you.
Wow. Amazing. And thank you for sharing with us and being vulnerable with us. How strong you were to go through all of that and to see your beautiful family here. Thank you for telling us that's who's sitting right here. I want to move on to our next question. And Alexa, I want to start with you because it follows with the last sort of commentary you gave. And so the question is, based on your experience with the New York Jets and kind of being under that NFL umbrella, right? How do organizations and communities benefit from your perspective when they do have women with a seat at the table? And what would you say, which is kind of what you were hinting at before, what would you say still needs to happen to make leadership more inclusive?
So I think the thing that is most important about women being at the table, and I talked about this a little bit with my coworkers, because I actually am fortunate that most of my team are women. And I started off with a team full of women, but we're on the activation side, so we don't really have a lot of women on the sales side. But from the activation side, I think anyone in the organization that it helps them is empathy, and also just a different perspective. I feel like women, I would say, are a little bit more organized in some senses. Having women at the table really helps with structure, putting together really thoughtful, thorough plans. In my role, we're kind of in this business of trying to get partners like a Duncan, like Kean, and all these partners to want to be our clients. So I think instead of just, putting together a list of assets that we just want to put on paper, it's being a little bit more thoughtful, and really understanding what the client wants. So versus just saying like, oh, we're going to give them some TV commercials or whatever, it's really building these programs, to cater to them, to make sure that they feel like the connection with us is important and helps us when it comes time for renewals. Because ultimately, just because they're our partners, we build these long-term relationships. I think women are very good with building relationships and maintaining those relationships. I think in terms of having a seat at the table, I think on the business side, at least where I work, we have a lot of women that work at the Jets. I think on the football side, they're starting to get there. I actually believe one Kean student was working in the athletic department, athletic training. But I think it's more so on the football side of really getting more women to be in more male dominant sports. So trusting them. And when I first started in 2013, I helped out football operations. And by that, you're driving people to the airport to and from. And there was this sensitivity about a woman driving, uh, prospective players to and from the airport. All I was doing was driving them. But we've definitely evolved where now we have a whole women team on the football operations side. But I think it's just still getting the opportunity for women to have a seat at the table.
Dr. Warren, in terms of allies, what can allies of any gender, frankly, do to help create more equitable leadership space?
I think I think that's a great question. Uh, I mean, as far as utilizing that and implementing with healthcare, um, literature shows that when you have diversity amongst the leadership, patient outcomes are better. So you have to have diversity. You have to have allies. That makes a difference. It makes a difference in the care, and I ditto what Alexa said earlier, as far as all those points on having the women on the leadership table. But whether they're an ally, whether they're not, I think what's important is that not just having one on the table. We need to have more than one. And what's important is that whether it's one or two, they have to be heard. There has to be an opportunity for growth. There has to be an opportunity where they get mentorship, where their opinions matter, because just being there on the table, it means nothing if we're not giving anything and it's not valued.
And that's really where the allies can play a key role, right? In helping to support and encouraging, if there's a meeting as an example, right? And there's a different perspective maybe coming from a woman. Well,
Absolutely.
allow that perspective to truly
Be
be
heard.
heard.
That's right.
And that leads to my question for you, Tiffany, in terms of, is there an example that you can think of where there was a different perspective? And did that actually change the outcome of a decision? Do you have an example where maybe you can recall that happening?
I would say that so in data technology and AI, which is the space where I sit predominantly, there are very few women in general. That is growing, thank goodness. I'd like to encourage more of you to move into those spaces. But I think that there have been times when I've been in rooms as the only representative of both my gender and my race, where I've been a little hesitant because I have an idea and I'm thinking, whoa, this idea is a little bit out of line with how everyone is talking right now. And then I question whether or not I should bring up my idea. But then what I realize is that and by the way, this is a muscle that you have to build. So you have to try it and then keep trying it and then keep doing it until you feel comfortable doing it. And because once you do it a few times, you'll get used to the types of responses you'll get back. And so in this session, I thought, okay, well, I should say my perspective. Like, I feel like I have a more holistic view than the one has been. Because what happens in rooms like that with senior leaders is that if you get the right person talking, everybody just goes with what that person says. And everybody just starts nodding, yeah, 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 and you're like, but that's not what the point, or you have a different perspective. So eventually I learned how to bring up my perspective, my point of view, timidly at first, like, oh, well, I have a thought, I have an idea. And then as time would go on in a much more confident way, sharing my perspective, which I feel that women in general have a broader we tend to have a broader perspective because I think in families, we're always the ones who are traditionally, like figuring multiple things out at once across the board. And as a result, it creates a level of creativity in all of us, I think, that we could bring to the conversation. That means that we generate new and interesting ideas. And even though those ideas may not be the ones that are being discussed in the room, we should put them on the table over and over and over, put them on the table. And so I started doing that a lot more. And then you get to a point where people are like, oh, well, ask Tiffany. She always has interesting ideas, right? But you have to build that muscle and you have to be confident, like speaking into your own space. Like, this is what I think. This makes sense. You know what you know. So even if it's not in line with what they are saying or what they're thinking, you know what you know. And if it's a valid, perspective, then you should definitely share it, put it out there. And sometimes the room will be silent, by the way. Like, you say it and you will get no response. And then they will go on with the conversation. So what? So what? You have a perspective, and the only way that we as women will start to infuse these conversations with our perspectives is that we start putting them out there regularly, leaning into them, doubling down on them. And so over time, you practice and you do that and you get much better at it. And then people start to learn your style and how you engage in meetings. But it's something that I think, a lot of women, I go to women conferences all the time. And the main question I get is, how do you overcome imposter syndrome? Like feeling like you don't belong. And that's how you do it, little by little. It's a muscle. Just like you go to the gym, you build your muscles. You go into these sessions, you build your muscle. You keep contributing, making recommendations, making suggestions, offering your perspective, and then it gets better over time.
And I think just to add on that, when you're talking about the room being silent, there are times where you may not have the best idea and there may be an alternate solution, but I think just being comfortable, I think that was one thing that I learned from growing within the organization, is to have a voice.
Yes.
Because a lot of times I would sit and just not say anything and listen, but you're not going to grow until people feel like they can trust you and you have some sort of say. So in being able to share your opinions and share your views just help you in your career, I think is definitely great that you shared that.
I really like that, and want us to make sure we heard that part about also recognizing the dynamics in the room. So if there's that group think happening, right? Don't don't feel like you have to succumb to that. Develop your muscle and use your muscle to raise a different perspective if you have a different perspective. And a lot of times, I mean, it doesn't always it's tough, right? But we have to tell ourselves, no, I'm going to say something. And we have to be conscious of, too, how we say things so that it is received, right? But I love that, of developing the muscle and truly being cognizant of the dynamics in the room.
Yeah. Can I just add one other thing? Someone taught me a really interesting lesson that I take into conversations with me. It's called the 10-80-10 rule. And what that means is that in any conversation or any room that you're in, 10% of the people are going to be behind what you have to say. They just are. They're there. They're going to be supportive. They're going to do what you want them to do. They're your rah-rah. In any room, even the ones that you think are not as friendly, there are those people. They just probably are more quiet. Then there's going to be 10% of the people who are never going to follow you no matter what you say. They are never, ever, ever, for whatever reason, you're a woman, you're black, you're this, you're that, they're not going to follow you. So you don't care. So the goal is not to try to win everybody over in the room. The goal is figure out who those people are who are in that top 10%. The other 80% are wishy-washy. They're going to go, you can sway them one way or the other, right? So you hone in on your 10%. The 80% are probably going to follow the strong 10%ers. So you get your, sort of the group coming together through that process. And you just accept the fact that in every room, there are going to be people who just aren't going to be fans. whatever. You're not fans of every room you go in. You know, you don't love everybody in that room. So just come to terms with that. And I think you'll feel more comfortable stating your perspective when you get in these rooms.
Thank you, Tiffany. That's definitely a tool for our toolkit. Dr. Warren, so a lot of conversations nowadays obviously are focused on workplace culture, burnout, balance, creating that work life balance in a demanding field like yours. So whether you take where you are today or you go back to, trauma medicine, in any case, how did you protect both your mental and physical being while continuing to grow as a leader? Because you talked about this earlier, right? Where you chose the night shift and you realized what maybe detriment or the fact that it took longer for you, but also in the context of that, how did you protect yourself mentally and physically?
So in medicine alone, there is a high burnout rate just in medicine. Um, um, Emergency medicine has one of the highest suicide rates. And I kind of mentioned it earlier for those of you who have watched the show The Pit. So it is very indicative of a day in the life in the emergency room. Out of all the all the medical shows, this is pretty much it. So sometime maybe a few months ago, I started watching season 1, and I was on episode 2, and I just started crying, and tears were just rolling down my eyes because I was like, I can't believe I did that for the last 20 years. How on world did I get through that? Like, it is absolutely crazy. The highs, the lows, somebody dying in front of you, somebody running in, can't breathe. It is a constant adrenaline rush. And then you have to be prepared in the next very minute when the next person dies for the next person to come in. So I thought, how did I survive such craziness? Well, when I got off work, you would see me in my car blasting my music, jamming all the way home till I got home. So I was like, I forgot everything that happened. I got home, I worked out. I went and took my shower, and then guess what I did? I started watching some ratchet reality TV show because I needed to bring it down. But one of the things that really allowed me to survive such stress was honing in on what my purpose is. My purpose is always about giving back. So I made sure that I was always active, involved in anything that involved with community involvement. So I'm active in Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, in which we do community advocacy. I'm active in Links Incorporated, in which we also do community engagement. I started a charter school in Newark, Great Oaks Legacy Charter School, because I wanted to give back to the kids in Newark. So that is what made me happy. That is what allowed me to get through that stress. And I turn that back on you to say, what our job is not our life. That was my job. My life is what my purpose is. And you have to find out what your purpose is. And that's what you dive your energy into so that you can get through the highs and the lows and the stress.
Tiffany, kind of the same question, but for you, what is that one habit or boundary that you have set that has made the biggest difference for you in maintaining wellness?
I think the boundary is not allowing people to take control of my time. You know, I work in a place where there are meetings all day, there are back-to-back meetings, people put meetings on top of meetings. You look at your calendars, you have 3 meetings in one, at the same time slot. It's crazy. So I really have started managing my time, like saying no. Like, no is such a powerful word, ladies, and we don't like to say it, because we like to say, yes, and can you do that? Yes, but no, I cannot. You have double booked me or triple booked me, and I cannot do that. Right? And I think we have to lean into no more And so the boundary is really about my time, how I spend my time. I want to make sure I get my job done, I do it well. But if I, God forbid, died right at this second, that job tomorrow would keep going. They will find someone, one of you, to take my place. And so it took me a while to get there though, but I think you guys can get there much sooner, right? Because we were growing up in a different time. Now I think you can get there much sooner and just go into a space where you make people respect your time. And by that, I don't mean that the boss asks you to do something and you're like, no, I'm busy. Not like that, but like really understanding starting to read to understand what's mandatory, what's necessary, what was a nice to have, what should I do, what do I not need to do, what are the calls I don't need to be on. Like start thinking about that early in the role or in your career so that you can set up a pace at which you kind of manage all of those things. So I think that time management, like really making people respect your time, is critical in sort of building your career so that you don't end up in a place where you're burned out and you feel like people have walked all over you and you lose your voice. But it helps you to do all of that.
It also helps create efficiency in your workday, right? So we're talking about wellness, but also creates efficiency in your actual work and your job. Alexa, so you talked about, the newer job that you're in, right? Based off of the reorganization at the New York Jets. So how about for you? Has your strategies that you put in place, have they changed and shifted with the new role?
Yeah, so I think what I've learned most is delegating, kind of going to time. I think as a woman or you think that you can do it all. And that's just not the case. And you just have to learn to trust the people around you. So there were a lot of things that I was doing that I had to take some time and sit back and realize that I could delegate this to the other people. In order to make time for myself, make time for my family. I have two little boys at home. And time management is very important to me, to your point.
Mhm.
Something happens to me tomorrow, someone will take my job. Um, and ultimately, I want to make sure that I'm there for my children. It's really important to me. My parents are always there for everything, and I want to set that same example. So I think it's more so same to what Tiffany was saying, like managing my time, managing my calendar, prioritizing things, figuring out what's important, what can kind of get pushed off to another day. I think also taking time off. Like, obviously, there are things that are a priority and you need to answer. But I think when I first started off in my career, when I took a vacation, I would see emails come through and I would automatically respond. That kind of opened up the gates for people to feel like you're accessible 24 hours a day. And in certain instances, there's something that's a priority and you need to prioritize that. But I also think is just setting those boundaries so people know when you're accessible and when to give you the space to kind of have some time to recharge.
And I just want to I just want to emphasize what she said earlier. And I think as women, a lot of time we carry that superwoman cape. And we feel like we can do it all because really we can, but we shouldn't. And what you said earlier was critical, delegation and utilizing the time. But delegation is so big because we end up doing everything because maybe they didn't do it fast enough and you want to get it done. Or maybe they left out some little part and you're like, I'll just do it. Learn now before you get a little older. You do not need to do it all. Delegation is a good thing. It's a great word. Learn it.
It's a very important word too, because it empowers people to do other things, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is right?
A leader is somebody who empowers others.
Yes.
That's the leader.
I have empowered people to do their roles. I've been in this role for a while. They know exactly what I need them to do. And I went someplace where they couldn't reach me. We were in Africa. And once you hit Africa, they're like, oh, you can't, VPN into the job and call. You can't do any of that. So we were disconnected. And I was like, this is a great example. So I use it a lot with my team. I'm like, make sure that you're delegating. Or if I come across someone who's a leader on my team who is not delegating, I work with them to help them understand the benefit, how to delegate, how it frees up your time, but more importantly, how it empowers someone else, right? The sign of a good leader is that you work yourself into obsolescence. Like you are no longer needed. You are a great leader because you have taught everyone around you how to lead.
Did you all catch that? That's another tool for the leadership toolkit, delegation and understanding why it's important, right? It's for us, but it's also to empower the people that work for us. So thank you all for that. What a powerful way to start. Hearing these women talk about their early foundations reminds us that every leader we admire has faced the same moment of uncertainty. Whether they were standing at the very beginning of their career or at a crossroads later in their journey. Whether you are a student just finding your voice, a professional navigating a mid-career pivot, or a seasoned leader looking to leave a new legacy, the lesson remains the same. Our starting blocks don't define our finish lines, and it's never too early or too late to begin your next ascent. Make sure to join us for our next episode, where we dive into part 2, focusing on resilience, overcoming obstacles, and how to stay at the top once you've arrived. Until then, keep climbing.